Fake news.
Finding sound bites of people saying, oh my God, I'm so panicking.
Propaganda.
How can you get the public willing to start a war?
Disinformation.
Causing fear, spreading messages of panic or making panic.
We all know that it exists.
This is our job. To be a journalist, you have to be criticizing the mighty, the powerful, the responsible ones.
But why does the media create it?
Now we're in times where fear spread over media again.
I met with a German media whistleblower to find out exactly who benefits of creating fake news.
How long were you in media for?
I started after my high school graduation when I was 20 years old. I started to write for the major newspaper in southern Germany, Süddeutsche Zeitung. After my graduation at university and journalism diploma in Berlin, I started working for TV. And then I did this for 18 years for the major public broadcasting network in Europe.
Were you still employed by the station when you spoke out?
No, I waited until I was really out by contract. In February 2022, I spoke out, and it was the very night Putin declared war against Ukraine. This declaration of war was #1 German-speaking YouTube video by most clicked, and I was #2 with 503,000 clicks within the first 24 hours. Yeah, because we produced fake news. And this in front of another war, which was the Iraq war, and this was very interesting to the public.
What happened with the Iraq war that you can then claim it was fake news?
Well, I was in the New York studio reporting from United Nations in 2003. News agency coming onto the correspondence saying huge panic in New York City because of poison gas. We, the producers, went and researched, but we didn't find any kind of proof. At the time, New York City had panic levels like orange, red, yellow, and so forth. So somebody wanted the German audience to get the message that there's panic level orange. But we didn't have any evidence. Still, the correspondent said, let's drive to my apartment. He instructed the neighbor to put duct tape on the window edges to show panic that poison gas is coming in from outside. This was completely fake. So we filmed this. Then I was told to drive with a cameraman to a shop selling gas masks and finding sound bites of people walking through the streets saying, oh my God, I'm so panicking. There's going to be poison gas attacks here soon. Of course, I didn't find anybody giving me those sound bites, but I was filming those gas masks from down below, so they look very big, you know. The producer called, said the correspondent found another shop where he got the sound bites that he needed. And this material was edited, put together to a piece, and this was broadcast in German, public, on primetime television. So this was fake.
Why would they want people to be fearful of the poison gas, the theoretical poison gas? What do you think their intention was with creating that piece?
We were in front of the outbreak of Iraq war. George W. Bush was kind of preparing. And at the United Nations, where we were reporting from, we got all those sound bites from Tony Blair, back then UK, German Chancellor Schröder, Jacques Chirac. The other countries, they all didn't want that war. But George W. Bush wanted that war. And how can you get the public willing to start a war? It's causing fear and spreading messages of panic or making panic. And this is what they did. But this, of course, is just my personal theory. I don't have any kind of proof. I just think it's obvious because now we're in times where there's fear spread over media again.
Were there some other instances when you were working that you saw them creating a narrative of fear that didn't necessarily exist?
In, I think it was November 2019, I was in the reporting shift. There's a Swiss lawyer who wrote a report about Julian Assange and his psychological state. And he witnessed psychological torture on Julian Assange. This report was very important to judge in what state Assange was. This Swiss lawyer had to present his result in front of German parliament. And I was talking to him on the phone, but he said, I'm in a very alarmed state. Yesterday evening, I was called into a secret room in the German parliament and they told me, you know what, we got your report, we didn't read it yet, and guess what, we're not interested in reading your report. Wow. So he really called onto my reporter abilities and said, please, you have to let me talk in your show. So this was another situation which has worldwide impact on freedom of speech, freedom of the press. There was a very, very high-end lawyer for United Nations who didn't get his point. Sure.
When it comes to covering politics, do they try and frame things at all and more in favour of certain politicians?
There was orders in our working place that a boss said, talk about this book in a good way. Let's make a 4-minute report about this book. and it was poems by a conservative politician. I said, excuse me, we're a cultural magazine show. I'm an expert on literature, and those poems are really bad. I refuse. So she tried to convince me, but I didn't give way. So what they did was very interesting. They waited for 3 days until I was not on the reporting shift anymore. And when I was off the reporting shift, there was another reporter. He did the piece.
Okay.
So this is how easy it is, you know. But I thought it was devastating.
Well, because again, they're just tailoring content to who they want to promote as opposed to putting out content that was fit for production.
Of course, this is not everyday life. This
Yeah.
is one example. And of course, I give you the examples that show where something is going wrong. There's a lot of stuff which went well. Otherwise, I would not have worked there for 18 years. I give you this example to show how it sometimes works. There was nobody from all the way up there from the government calling, you know, all the bosses down until the little reporter does something. That's not how it works. It's subtle. It's very, you know, on a fine level. That's where it's happening.
Where is that fine level coming from, though? Because if it's not coming from someone up the top, where is that fine level even coming from? Is it people's own bias?
It's so interesting, that question. I have thought about this so much. My theory is, and it's also, again, just a hypothesis, there must be agencies who kind of set up certain mindsets as a concept. And then it's being spread into various channels, advertising, agency reports that we get, the way that pictures are created, the illustration, aesthetics, and this adds up.
You talked about the agency report. What did you mean by the agency reports?
The example that I told you about in New York was an agency report saying poison gas, panic, alarm level orange. Then the correspondent goes out and makes a TV report about this, right? Another example was Leipzig Book Fair, which is one of the largest book fairs in the whole world. People come from all over the world. I was sent there from my channel as a reporter. I was driving through the city with a camera team, and we were supposed to make some pictures before the fair starts. There was an agency report from my base saying there's right-wing activists all over the city demonstrating against something that is happening on Leipzig Book Fair. We drove through Leipzig and we didn't find a single demonstration, no right-wing activists. And then at the evening, I called to the head of media. I didn't find anybody, so we cannot talk about this. And he said, well, but I have like 85 reports from the agency saying that there's right-wing people in the street demonstrating, so you have to report this. I said, no. I'm a reporter, and this is what I learned as a journalist. You go someplace, and unless you haven't talked to the people, you should not report. And if you find that there is nothing, and we drove through the city the whole day, this is my result. What is more important? Me as witnessing the reality, or is it something that you get from some kind of agency? And we had a huge fight in our team the next morning because I wrote a very explicit email. I said, I'm not being manipulatable. I will report what I see, and this is my education as a reporter, and I will stick to it. They argued with numbers of agency reports.
Wow. How often do you think that happens, that the agency report comes out and it could be false or it could be misleading, and then that way the reporters that are acting on something are doing it in a way that isn't honest, but they don't know that it's not honest? How often do you think that happens?
I cannot estimate, really.
Yeah.
From my experience, nobody does anything bad on purpose.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to really be good and do good work. But we are all human. We can be lazy. We can look where the best opportunity is.
Do you think there's a space where media can be government funded and stay relatively unbiased?
It's a good question. I can only talk for the German market. I think it's important that taxpayers pay for public media. Then they have a slight chance to have influence, that we will have free reporting. This is the goal we're still fighting for. And that's why I don't think that we should cut off the media from taxpayers. I think the taxpayers have to stand up and say, this is our program, this is our right to have influence on the program. So give us free speech, give us free and good journalism.
But what would that look like in a practical sense? Because at the moment, and we've seen this worldwide, countries have had the largest protests they have ever had because they wanted to stand up for their democratic right, and governments haven't cared. They haven't changed and adapted to their COVID guidelines, for example, to suit the people. So then do you think that that would work if those same groups were standing up for freedom of the press and freedom of speech? And then what would be the practical implementation of that? Would it look like an independent governing body? How would that actually work?
Wow, that's a good question. I haven't enough thought of this to give you a sufficient answer. I'm sorry.
It's something that I think about a lot, though, because in New Zealand we've got taxpayer-funded media, but the issue that we're seeing now is that they've got what they call public interest journalism fund, which is where journalists have to write in and tell the government what they want to write about. The government then will decide if they approve it or not, and then they get the funding from there. So effectively, you've got a whole lot of journalists that then create stories they know the government will approve to then get money coming in. And this is the issue that we have. So then you've got stories that are tailored to suit what the government wants them to say, because these journalists need the money and the companies need the money. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that traditional media is dying out. And so therefore, how are they going to sustain themselves? Because with the digital age, there's so much media now coming through that people are happy to produce freely and quickly and of a high quality, that it makes it very difficult for a traditional news station to stay alive with private funding.
I would like to give you an insight. In the letter they gave me to kick me out, they said that I used the conferences, the journalistic conferences every morning for my system critique, like critique against the system. And the point what I was addressing to was that they cut off the online team from our show, which was 7 people. And we were all worried. The presenters, the anchors, the producers, the editors, everybody was worried that they were all protesting internally against this step, because a show that doesn't have an online team is dying, right? This is where public media kind of showed the false face by themselves, because I just gave critique about this, and then they wrote me a letter saying, you drop out, we don't want you anymore because of system critique. But this is our job.
Yeah.
To be a journalist, you have to be criticizing the mighty, the powerful, the responsible ones,
Were you free to discuss any issue and talk about any event that you wanted to, the way that you wanted to? Did you have that kind of freedom of speech in Germany when you were presenting, when you were writing?
It's funny. Inside, they always say, well, we have freedom of speech. You can say anything you want to. And of course I did. I spoke out so many times. But the problem is, how does the team react? And it's always teamwork to do journalism, for TV at least. So then sometimes they just ignored my comments. They just continued the conversation where they stopped before my argument came. And this is how you can kind of make arguments silent too, if you ignore them, even though they're important. Just as an example, during COVID times, I found it interesting to make a report about the only musician who went to court because he wanted to have his money back because his concerts were cancelled. And it was not about the right to perform that he was fighting for and going to court. It was just to get his 1,500 euros back, which is like a tiny amount. Yeah. But my colleague said, we cannot report about this. We have a deadly pandemic. I said, excuse me, this man has to live. He's a musician. He has a family, he has a house, he has a car. Why should we not report this? And we're a cultural program. So this kind of shows how where the conflicts were,
To me, what I got from that story was they wanted to report only what they felt people would be okay with, and only what they felt would be approved, in terms of they wanted to say, but it's a pandemic, so we don't want to upset people by talking about something and framing the pandemic in a way where it could somehow look like the pandemic wasn't as serious as what they wanted people to believe.
Yes, I would twist the answer in another direction.
Yeah.
If societies are in a crisis, what do we need? We need something for the soul. We need music. We need the beautiful, and of course we need community. But being together was difficult. So even more than give the people performing arts. And what France did, very interesting. They made up during COVID time a 24/7 channel for all the artists of the nation, musicians, performers, dancers, everything that has to do with arts. So they were all invited to come there and perform. So they had a reason to practice, to exercise.
Wow.
They were able to be creative, and they had an audience, and the culture was being preserved, or given a stage. And I said, listen, we have empty studios on our campus. We are the largest network in Europe. Why can we not use our taxpayers' money to invite the artists and give them the same opportunity?
Yeah.
But they were not interested. So this is maybe for our next lockdown times. We don't know what we're going to face.
Hopefully there are no more, but yeah.
know.
But you're right. There's incredible stories in each country of things that they did that were wonderful when it came to the pandemic in terms of helping certain areas and helping certain people. But it's just linking those together so that if there is ever another terrible thing that happens, at least people still see hope. Because it was the lack of hope that I found most disturbing and most distressful throughout all of this. Everything was always terrible, but there was never any hope for people, and there was never anything that we'll get out of this and give it time. And it just seems like something that they never wanted to end. Particularly for New Zealand, anyway. It kept going for such a long time, far past when it needed to.
Yeah. And I always want to say, after I dropped out, be truthful to what we have as a basis of living, and really say our own truth. After I said it on 4 shows, I kind of pulled back into my private life. But I'm so grateful. And since then, my life felt like in a very suspenseful movie also sometimes. And, yes, and I think if I would have stayed at the old place, it would have felt boring, always the same and the same again, and also fake. I didn't want to be fake, so that's why I did it.
Thank you so much, and thank you for speaking out, because it means a lot to other people, and hopefully it can encourage other people as well to, if they witness something that they think is wrong that's then being produced and sent to the masses, hopefully they'll feel comfortable enough and brave enough like you have been to speak out.
Well, thank you for talking to me. It was my pleasure. Good luck.
Thank you. Perfect.
Are you sick of the government-funded media here in New Zealand? Well, so are the team at nznewsessentials.com. They are fighting against legacy media to bring you the news that you need without the government's influence. Head to nznewsessentials.com, subscribe and be part of their newsletter.